Well, I feel naked without my tie tonight, but Jack needed it worse than I did to go with his pink shirt. This week a lady passed away in Edison. She was 91 years old, and her 12 brothers preceded her in death, and her 3 sisters. And she was the 16th child in that family by one father and one mother. She was a member of the Richland Road Church of Christ in Marion. And I don't know why I was talking about that to Kathy today, but anyway, I noticed that she was born in Monroe County, Ohio. And I mentioned to Kathy that Monroe County in Ohio has the highest per capita members of the Churches of Christ anywhere in America. It outbeats Nashville, Tennessee, and Harris County in Texas, Dallas, and all the big counties where there are dozens of Churches of Christ. But Monroe County, Ohio, has more members of the church than any other county in America. I think the next county is Jackson County, Tennessee, where I started preaching. And it's all hill country and a lot of good folks there and a lot of members of the Lord's church there. Why am I telling you that? I don't know. I just happened to think about it. Leroy's deciding what Sundays we're going to eat and what Sundays we're not going to eat. I'm sitting there, Leroy, thinking, I want to eat that Sunday. Excuse me. Let's go to Zephaniah. Told again, Kathy, when we got home today, I said, there's not a whole lot in Zephaniah. But let me give you a quick background to Zephaniah, at least in terms of the time frame. Zephaniah made his prophecies and his teachings prior to the defeat of Judah and the Babylonian captivity. If you haven't figured it out by now, let me figure it out for you. The minor prophets, for the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, all prophesied about the time in the neighborhood of 100 to 200 years before Judah was taken captive into Babylonian captivity. Most of the minor prophets prophesied of the destruction of Judah. And it's a warning to them, repent or perish. That's basically the warning in a few words. Unless you repent, you're going to perish. And so God warned them over and over and over again, and we read the minor prophets, and it's the same thing over and over and over again. And we wonder, isn't one warning enough? Well, a few years ago, you know where my grandparents live, where Linda lives today, there was a bridge right out there in front of her house that they completely closed 42 because they replaced that bridge. And they started putting signs on 42 north of the cemetery, Shock Cemetery, that the road is closed. Just after you pass 314, they put a huge sign in the middle of the road closed. Well, one day I happened to be over there at the barn on 42 up on the bank, and there were people coming south on 42. And I thought to myself, can't you read? The signs have been put up at least 4 miles before you get there. And as I watched some of these cars trying to make a U-turn in the middle of 42, here came an 18-wheeler just flying down the road. I said, I'm going to stand there and watch this. He can't turn around in the middle of the road. There are no lanes for him to turn around in. And there's no shoulder large enough. I'm going to watch the show. Well, there's a little lane that goes up to our barn. He went down to the very last sign where the dirt had been piled up in the middle of the road, and the road's closed. And obviously, Pete, I don't know that he had driven an 18-wheeler very often, but he decided to back his way up to Johnsville. And he wasn't good at it. And all of a sudden, he saw this little lane and went up to our barn, and he thought, well, this is it right here. I'm going to back this 18-wheeler up that lane. It's not wide enough for an 18-wheeler. And besides, there's a tree that's hanging over. This is going to be a good show. I'm going to watch it. For the next hour, I watched it. He had a partner with him who got out and tried to direct him. After an hour, they wiggled, and I think he took out a headlight on the other side of the road, but he finally got it turned around. And he got out of there. How many warnings do people need in this world? Seriously. How many warnings? The same thing happened down on 61, I think it was. The road was closed, and this gentleman drove his car right by all the signs, and when he got to the point where the road was gone, he went on anyway and hung his car on the side of the open ditch. You know something? Warnings are there for a reason. But people ignore the warnings now and in Zephaniah's time. God had warned them over and over and over again for at least 200 years that if they don't repent, they're going to be destroyed. In Zephaniah, that's the same message, except Zephaniah uses a phrase excuse me, that's been used by other prophets and even in the New Testament. He calls it the day of the Lord is coming. He's not talking about the coming of Christ. He's talking about a day of destruction that will be brought on these people because of their sin. And he talks about the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord comes in about 606 years BC. That was when the Babylonians came and defeated the nation of Judah. Now, I want to stop here for a moment and talk a little bit about the destruction of Judah. When the Babylonians came, the first thing they did was to take over the nation of Judah. In other words, they set up a puppet government. And one of the things that was quite common in that time, and the Romans did it later, was they went throughout Judah and they found the professional people, especially the young professional people, took them captive back to Babylon, or the nation of Chaldea. And the idea behind that was very clear. They wanted these young men who had a bright mind, who understood a lot of what we today would call science. We want to bring them back to our home, and we're going to use them to build up our nation, our society. The United States did the same thing at the end of World War II. We went into Germany, and we understood that the Germans were working with rocket science and all of that, and We didn't have that knowledge. We didn't have that ability. So the government went in and literally took these men captive and brought them back to the United States. Pernambron Braun in Huntsville, Alabama, was one of them, the greatest of all of them, I guess. The Russians did the same thing. This is what the Babylonians did to the Jews in Judah. Then they came back a second and third time. And each time they took more of what was available in terms of materials to build with. They took more people. And finally, the only people left were the so distantly poor that they couldn't do anything. We don't want them. And then they destroyed the country. They went in and destroyed the buildings. And most of the destruction, most of the destruction was done by fire. The buildings made out of wood, they destroyed them. And then they destroyed a building that was at the very heart of Judaism, which was the temple. Solomon's temple was the iconic landmark of all of Judah. And they destroyed it. It was not built of wood. It was built of stone. And they tore it down block by block, carting off some of the material. All of the precious things that were inside, they took to Babylon. The country was desolate. Now, in Zephaniah, and we get to here now, in Zephaniah, he makes it very clear that the destruction of Judah will be complete. Unless you repent, the destruction's coming and it will be complete. Now, very quickly, let's just look at a summary of Zephaniah. And I do want to read a little bit at the end of the book in a few minutes. There are three elements in the book of Zephaniah. And by the way, before I begin, if you read something about the book of Zephaniah, the very first thing they're going to tell you is that Zephaniah tells us who he is. He tells us who his father is, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, back to 4 generations. That's unique. For example, Habakkuk, we know nothing about him. But Zephaniah traces his ancestry back 4 generations. So that's different and unique. But the three elements in the book of Zephaniah is, first of all, he presents an indictment against his own people, Judah. That's a very important part of this book. The second, there's a denunciation of foreign countries around Judah. First of all, he says that the Philistines are going to be destroyed because of their sins. Now, the Philistines lived east of Judah. Then the Moabites, west. I'll get my directions straight in a minute. The Philistines lived west of Judah. Then he condemns and says that God is going to destroy the Moabites and the Amorites, which live east of Judah, which is the modern-day country of Jordan, because of their sin. Then he turns to the Ethiopians, which of course is south of Egypt, and they're going to be destroyed because of their sins. And last, he says that the Assyrian nation, which had already destroyed Israel, is going to be destroyed too, and they're north. Notice, north, south, east, west are all going to be destroyed because of their idolatry, their immorality, their sin. And then there's Judah in the middle, which will be destroyed too for the same reason. I want to go back for a moment, and I've got them written here in front of me because the list is quite long and I don't intend to go through the whole list. There are several sins mentioned in Zephaniah that he condemns and demands that the people repent. First of all, the sin that we know about quite frequently, because it's mentioned as far back as the time of Joshua, is the worship of Baal. I do not understand, or neither can I appreciate, why the worship of Baal was so popular. But it was. When Israel came into the promised land, these people were worshiping an idol, a male idol. Baal is the male god, and then there's a female god. And those two gods are nothing more than idols created by man, and they become extremely enticing to the children of Israel. Let's worship Baal. Remember Elijah up on Mount Carmel and had the contest between the prophets of Baal and himself, and they were going to kill an animal, put it on an altar and pour water on it, and you pray all day to Baal and let him set it on fire. Well, nothing happened. And Elijah called on the Lord, and the Lord sent fire and consumed the sacrifice, the wood, and the stones, and lapped up the water besides that. And the prophets of Baal were 400, it says. And the instructions of Elijah to the people was go kill the prophets of Baal. Now, in normal American political correctness, we would say, well, that's inexcusable. You know, if they want to worship Baal, let them do it. You know, that's our philosophy around here in this country today. But God understood the influence of those individuals, and it would lead others to the worship of Baal. So they had to go. They had to be destroyed. And so Baal is a worship that encompasses a lot of things. For example, in some cultures where Baal was worshipped, human sacrifices were made. In other cultures, children are offered in sacrifice. Take your 4-year-old little girl and offer her in sacrifice. All of this came from the worship of Baal. So that was a sin. A second sin was the fact that they, and it's mentioned in Zephaniah, they were worshiping heavenly bodies. And if you look at a lot of cultures around the world, especially the Egyptians, who was their chief god? The sun god. And of course, it was not unknown to these Jews to worship the sun god, because that's where Daddy and Grandpa came from down in Egypt. And now it was being practiced here in Judah. They were worshiping the sun, the moon, and other perhaps terrestrial bodies. 3, and this is something that we need to take heart, that's probably not the right word. We need to take warning today in America. They were practicing the concept of worshiping more than one God. There's the worship of the God, and add to that other gods. Oprah Winfrey takes that approach, announcing publicly that there are lots of gods, and every god that we have will get us to heaven. 2 weeks ago. Whatever one you want, pick, and it's all right. It'll get you the same place. So if you believe Muhammad is the prophet of God, or Allah, or some other Hindu god, that's fine. It'll all get you to heaven. In other words, they wanted to worship two gods and thought they could do it. Jesus put that to death right away when he said, no man can serve two gods, to serve two masters. Also, he condemns them, and I've got to move on. He condemns them for their lack of desire to find God. In other words, their lack of zeal, their lack of interest, their lack of enthusiasm in worshiping the God of heaven. That's just a short list of some of the things that Zephaniah condemned his people for. Now, we don't have the time to go through the history of Judah at this point. But at this stage in their existence, Judah, because of a lot of political alliances, had become a very rich country. You know, why do people put their trust in riches? Well, yes. Why is it comforting? Because money will do what? It not only will buy things, it'll buy people. It brings influence. Man running for a political office and you contribute $2.5 million to his campaign chest, and you knock on his door one day, guess what he's going to do? He's going to answer it. Now you send your $3 in and you knock on his door, he's not going to answer it. So we here in America, just like Judah, was rich. So any problem we have, our money will buy us out of a very bad situation. Because Zephaniah says it, it seems clear that the children of Judah, the Israelites, thought that if the Babylonians come our way or somebody else, we are so rich and so powerful that we can call on our rich friends to defend us and keep us out of trouble. Zephaniah says your money's not going to do it. By the way, when you get in trouble, a lot of time your rich friends don't know who you are. Okay? There is one passage, it's over in Zephaniah chapter 2, I believe, somewhere in that chapter, where Zephaniah says that the day is coming, and I'm paraphrasing, but in that day, the Lord will hide those that keep his commandments. In other words, there are those righteous individuals. They're going to suffer, but they're not going to be destroyed. Now, to remember the 3 young men that were taken in the first Babylonian captivity, what are they? You've forgotten. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. There's another one. Daniel. Did they suffer? Well, yes. But in the end, God protected them. Now, there's one more part. I've talked a long time on a very short book, haven't I? There's one more part of the book of Zephaniah, and it's always true in all of the Old Testament minor prophets. And that is that in the end, God's going to save a few, a remnant. God's never destroyed his people. He's destroyed a lot of them because they were not loyal or faithful to him, or they were immoral. But there were always a few. You know, we talk about how few interest there is in Christianity today. Not only is there little interest, but Christianity is being condemned today as being a prejudicial religion, or a religion that has no sense of human need. So don't be surprised, excuse me, that your grandchildren will be fighting that philosophy very soon. I want to go to the last chapter in Zephaniah, and there are only 3 of them. And I want to read to you at least a couple verses here, referring to those that are going to be left, be a remnant. And here's what he says, and I would like to read the whole thing, but in verse 13, the remnant of Israel shall not do iniquity, nor speak lies, neither shall a deceitful tongue be found in their mouth. For they shall feed and lie down, and none shall make them afraid. The remnant. And let's skip a couple verses and go to verse 18. I will gather them that are sorrowful for the solemn assembly, who are of thee, to whom the reproach of it was a burden. Behold, at that time I will undo all that afflict thee, and I will save her that halteth, and gathereth her that is driven out, and I will get them praise and fame in every land where they have been put to shame. You know, that's talking about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel. And at that time I will bring you again, even in the time that I gather you. For I will make you a name and a praise among all people of the earth, when I turn back your captivity before your eyes, saith the Lord. Look at what that's saying. I'll be with you in captivity, those of you that are righteous, and you'll come back, and the time will come where a praise among all the people of the earth will be directed. Remember why they're going to be praised? For the coming of Christ. For Christ came through the ancestors of Mary. Her kinfolk were in Babylon. They suffered right along with the others, but they got to come back home. And through that little young girl, however old she was, became the mother of the Son of God. And by the way, Joseph, her husband, his ancestry had been in Babylonian captivity, but they came back. Why? Because they were of the remnant that didn't give up, kept their faith. You know, I'm a historian, and I'm not a very good one, but I'm a historian by heart anyway. And by the way, some woman in Belleville last week told me, I'm kin to you, and I'm coming to your house so you can tell me how we're kin. I don't know. But anyway, I never met her before, I don't think. But you know, we live in a land today where the righteous that fear the Lord, and we get down in our really dumps because, like the prophet of old, I'm the only one left, Lord, come and get me. I've had it. But, you know, God's in charge of this world, and He's going to protect His own. That's not a very good outline of Zephaniah, but at least you get the picture of what it's all about. So, Lord willing, next Sunday, which, let me get my dates right, next Sunday is September the 1st, right? Okay. And then the next Sunday, I won't be speaking. Okay.